I'm Joan Conrow, and welcome to Alliance for Science Live. Today we'll be talking about the Hawaii papaya, which was engineered to resist the destructive ringspot virus. It's the first GM crop to be developed by a public sector scientist, Dennis Gonsalves of Cornell University, to help smallholder farmers. Our guests are all Alliance for Science Global Leadership Fellows who are passionate about science communication. They're here today to share their expertise on the subject. Joni Kamiya lives on the island of Oahu. Her day job is occupational therapist, but she spends much of her time as an advocate, helping people to understand the challenges facing agriculture in Hawaii and the value of GM crops. Her family's farm specializes in growing GM papaya. Hi, Joni, how are you doing today?
Good morning. I'm doing good.
Good, thank you for joining us. Luis Ventura lives in Mexico City. He's a biologist with expertise in biosafety, and he engages in outreach and communication about the role of GM crops in Mexico and Latin America. Welcome, Luis.
Hi, thank you.
Hi, good to see you. And our third guest is Guido Nunez-Mujica. He's a data scientist and computational biologist who lives in San Francisco. He is originally from Venezuela, where he became interested in biotechnology after a group of activists burned a test field of GM papaya. So let's get started here. And Joni, can you tell us a little bit about how the ringspot virus was affecting your family's farm?
So basically, my dad has been a farmer for over 50 years. And, over the years, he saw the papaya get hit by the virus here and there. And over time, the virus started to get really worse. And so the only tool that they had was to move fields. And in Hawaii, as an island, there's only so much you can do to move because there's no other options. There's not much land to farm. So started off in Waikane, got the virus, moved down to the EA, the virus came, moved back to Ha'ula, the virus came, and there was no escaping it. So over the decades, pretty soon there was no escaping. And the other problem is that papayas grow pretty much all over Hawaii. And there would be backyard farmers that would grow their papaya trees with virus and not kill it. And so that became a major problem, which hit all the commercial growers. And so that we needed tools. That was very obvious at the time.
Now, is the ringspot virus also a problem in Venezuela and Mexico? Luis, we'll start with you.
Yes, well, I didn't have an idea, but Mexico is the second world largest producer of papaya and a top exporter. So there are papaya virus in Mexico, and it was first detected in 1974. So since then, the papaya production in Mexico is being damaged for this terrible disease. And yes, there are this virus in the Mexican fields, and it's affecting mostly to small farmers and to medium farmers. Even though the large farmers have created like this strategy to fight with the virus and to learn to live with the virus. So it's something that I can share with you more going further. But yes, there are ringspot virus in papaya, and it's affecting the production in Mexico.
And what about in Venezuela, Guido?
Yes, it was a big problem 20 years ago. It is still a problem now. It affects, yes, a lot of small producers. We did used to export that many papayas because the local varieties in Venezuela are very different from the ones that are popular abroad. So it's mostly domestic consumption. And it got to the point where a lot of farmers hadn't seen papaya trees that gave multiple generations of fruit. It was just assumed that you need to chop because the papaya trees will give you fruit only once. And people didn't understand that it was the virus, not the tree. Mm-hmm. It was that ingrained.
So very serious. So Joni, you know, you grew up with papaya that was healthy, and then as the virus became more established, you know, tell us a little bit about what does the ring spot virus do to a tree, and how were farmers controlling it besides moving their fields? Is there any control for it?
So basically, you know, when we had a healthy field, the seedlings would grow really nice into nice big trees. So full of the canopy would be full of leaves. However, when the tree is like in its prime, pretty soon you see at the very top of the tree, the leaves get very mottled. So here's a beautiful tree that's only a year old, ready to produce, and the upper fruits start to shrivel, and there's no photosynthesis, and the tree eventually dies. So as a farmer, you're going to be expected to see, oh, I'm going to have a good tree with lots of fruit, but wiped out. And you had to kill those trees or risk spreading it. So it's very devastating to be taking care of a field for 1 year only to have virus infected. So it's not.
Mm-hmm. You're cutting out a tiny bit, Joni, so I'm wondering if maybe if you got a tiny bit closer to your computer or something, if maybe that would help, but you're getting, every now and then you're cutting out. There you go. So it takes about a year for a papaya tree to grow and produce fruit. Is that what you're saying?
Oh, yeah, kind of glitchy. It's hard to hear.
Okay. I think we're probably having a little bit of an internet problem. It could be on my end here. So you know, Guido, tell us, when farmers are growing papaya, so they plant the seed, or they plant a seedling, and then it takes about a year before they can harvest the fruit?
Yes. Yes, that's what happens. And usually the papaya tree will give you fruit several times, but if it's affected by the virus, it will kill it before it can bear fruit again. So a lot of people thought that was just the tree. That's the way things are.
Mm-hmm. So in terms of, I know when I talked to some of the farmers in Hawaii, Joni, you know, they would put all this time and money into producing, or, you know, planting a field and expecting some harvest out of it, but then they would end up really with nothing that was harvestable. So tell us a little bit about, you know, how important is the papaya industry in Hawaii, and who's growing this crop?
In Hawaii, the papaya is like the banana for breakfast. Everybody eats it. And one of the reasons is that it helps with regularity. And so it's very, very essential. So when the papaya virus really started hitting our production, or even all the other farmers' production, the customers were like, we need the papaya, because a lot of them will buy 7 a week for the whole week because they ate it every day. So when you don't have your staple fruit, it's like completely foreign to them. You know, at the assisted livings, they had to have papaya. If there's no papaya, the residents get upset. And so it's same in the community. And so that's why Hawaii recognized the need to save the fruit. And so a lot of effort went to studying what could be done over the decades, because it's very important to our diet.
Mm-hmm. And are these primarily small farmers, or are they big companies, or who's growing the papaya there in Hawaii?
Majority of the farmers are very small, maybe 30 acres, maybe even smaller, but there's just many of them because it's a good cash crop. You can grow it, sell it, get your money, grow it. So it's one of those good crops that it's not only one season, it grows all year round here. And so that makes it a really important crop for Hawaii farmers. So when those farmers don't have that, what options are there? There's not a whole lot. And it grows pretty well throughout the island, which makes it an even better crop.
Mm-hmm. So now, Luis, tell us a little bit about the papaya industry in Mexico. You mentioned that it's a major export. So who's growing the crop, and where are you exporting it?
I don't know you know, but Mexico is composed of about 32 states. Just as the United States, Mexico have 32 states, And from the 32 states, 20 of the states are papaya producers. And it's mostly, I kind of did a map. I think that no, I realized that it's like a mirror effect, so maybe it not makes sense. But what I want to show is that even in Mexico, the 20 states that are producing the papaya are from the south of Mexico, that is where it's more a tropical environment. Mm-hmm. So it's more usual to get like this tropical crop. And more of the exportation that Mexico does are go to the United States, is the main importer. And I said, in Mexico, you can find the small farmers, the medium farmers, and the large farmers. And thinking about the numbers are a high number of the farmers from, you partner the farmers, the small and the medium farmers, that you compare with the large farmers that are just a small amount, but are the ones that are leading the market and are the ones that are really involved with the decision-making process that is affecting this crop. Mm-hmm. And yes, it's right now like the situation that is happening in Mexico with the papaya.
Mm-hmm. And what about in Venezuela, Guido? Tell us, is it still a cash crop or an export crop there, and who's growing it?
Well, the Venezuelan agriculture has had a lot of problems for the last 10 years or so. And honestly, I'm not sure if the situation, what's the current situation, because it changes very fast. Mm-hmm. But many of the farmers were having problems simply because they could not get the supplies that modern agriculture needs. They could not get fertilizers. They could not get insecticides. They could not get herbicides. So they went back to a more primitive way of doing agriculture that requires that most of the population actually work as farmers. But Venezuela is a very urban country, so you have a huge problem in food safety. Mm-hmm. And I don't know those specific situations with papaya, but many other crops, farmers are having a very tough time growing them and selling them. And a lot of the crop is being wasted just because of the pests.
Mm-hmm. Now, we've seen that this virus and other problems are affecting papaya really everywhere, but Hawaii so far is the only place that has this genetically modified ring spot virus resistant papaya. So Joni, tell us, why was Hawaii the pioneer here? I mean, most people just sort of think about Hawaii as maybe a little behind the times or something, but it was very much in the forefront with this product. So tell us why it was leading here.
I think part of the reason why Hawaii was able to get the GMO papaya was, for one, the papaya industry had organized, to work with the university to really start the research to get that done. And there was also political will within the legislature and even in our congressional delegation to help fund the research, because at the time it was Danny Noe, and he was very much into investing into Hawaii, and so a combination of factors really helped to push the project through. And there was just a lot of organization within the papaya farming that made the difference. I think that's what led to the whole research and our ability to get that technology for the farmers.
Sounds like somebody's got a dog in the background, which I can relate to. Mine's often whimpering here as I'm trying to do something on Zoom. So Joni, tell us a little bit about how does the virus-resistant papaya work? What is the technology here? I mean, what makes it effective?
So the technology that really helps us is that it's if you think about it, it's low tech. It's like a vaccine. So we've inoculated the papaya so that it doesn't catch the very virulent disease. And as much as people think that it's like a super plant, it's not really. It's just a regular looking. You can't tell the difference when you look at a regular tree and a organic tree or whatever, because over time you will see the difference, because the non-inoculated tree really, it gets hit. It dies. I mean, we've seen that in our own fields where we accidentally planted some non-GMO trees, and little by little they all got hit by disease. But it's not something that a lot of people fear.
Mm-hmm. And so, you know, Guido, when they were doing the work on the GM papaya in Venezuela, were they using the same technology that is now being employed in Hawaii, or was it a different approach?
Yes, it was the same approach, but as I told you earlier, the Venezuelan variety of papaya is very different. To begin with, the size of the papaya can be this huge. It's not the little papayas, and it's slightly less sweet, and the consistency is different. And the color is bright red, more than the yellow. Actually, when the first time I had the rainbow papaya, I was very surprised. Oh, it's so bright, it's yellow. It's not red. It was very different to me. So the idea was to adapt the same technology that Hawaiians had, but to our local varieties, because we didn't want to lose our local varieties. And that was the main effort, because they could have just brought the seeds from the papayas and told the farmers, you know what, guys, now you're gonna grow this if you wanna. That would have been the easiest approach, but no. We had a team of scientists that really wanted to preserve the local biodiversity and work with the farmers. Okay, this is what you have. This is what we will work with. And but the approach was the same. The technology was the same, just adapted to local conditions. And that's what they tried. That's what they did. Actually. That's what they started doing. And unlike in Hawaii, as Joni shared with us, they had a lot of institutional support. We had some, but then it was withdrawn from us. And there were also a lot of political issues that made sure that even the people who were working in this technology were not able to defend it, which was a mystery for me at the time. I was 17, 18 years old, and I couldn't understand why scientists were not standing up many years later. Understand, well, if they did that, they would have ended up in prison. So.
So I do want to talk about some of the politics that are involved here, because we saw both in Hawaii and in other countries where you've had positive and negative. But before we move into that, I just wanted, Joni, to talk a little bit about, in terms of the varieties. So your family actually developed its own variety, the Kamiya Gold, is that correct? That uses the technology, but was put into a variety that you preferred? Or tell us a little bit about how farmers kind of control the seed and the technology there in Hawaii.
Yeah, so my grandfather and my dad, when they were trying to figure out what crop they wanted to grow, worked with the University of Hawaii to develop something that grew well on the windward side of Oahu. And so they worked with a professor, Dr. Nakasone, developed what's called the Kamiya line. And that grew really well here, and the texture was really sweet, really nice. Customers loved it. However, over time, that did not withstand the virus. So we landed up having to cross it with the rainbow papaya that had the GMO technology. And that's how we got the Laie Gold. And that was done by Maureen Fitch, who had worked with Dennis Gonsalves to develop the papaya. So now our customers get to have the original Kamiya line with the GMO technology. And that's what protects our crops, and has been for like 20 years. So we're very fortunate that that kind of research did take place to help us, because a lot of the farmers on this side of the island grow the same papaya because it does really well here.
Now, I know that
Joan,
yeah,
so before moving forward to the politics, I just want to share with you that doing like the research about the situation of the papaya in Mexico, I found that in the late 90s, there were some projects to develop genetic engineering papaya ringspot virus resistant in Mexico. And actually there was, I think that 4 projects that were developed by national institutions and were funded by foundations. And during the process that it was development, they already get the new varieties and the crop ready to the fields, but they need to go through a biosafety framework that is already in place in Mexico, and this is very over-regulated.
Mm-hmm.
So they have three main problems to get environmental release. One is that during this assessment, the regulators found that Mexico is the center and origin of the papaya. So there was like this worry about the gene flow between the transgenic papaya, the conventional papaya, as well as the organic production of papaya. So it was like one of the things that stopped the GM introduction of papaya in Mexico. The second one is that in Mexico, as well as in many Latin American countries, there is a big problem with the public perception about the transgenics because they are stealing the varieties of the indigenous people, they are stealing the genes, the biodiversity. And the third one is that, as I told you earlier, there are 3 different kind of producers in Mexico: the small, the medium, and the largest.
Mm-hmm.
And the largest farmers who have like the big areas planted have learned to live with the virus. So they already did a strong investment. So they think that if the GM papaya is open in Mexico, it's going to open the market. So everyone is going to be allowed to produce more papaya, to produce it even in the backyards or in small areas. Mm-hmm. So they think that their profits will be reduced. So one of the projects was funded by the large producers, and at the moment I was ready to go to the fields, they stopped the funding and there was no any effort. So since 1999, there was the last application for the authorities for a GM papaya in Mexico, and since then there is no any effort to introduce the papaya, and it's kind of sad.
Yeah, that is. So what I find interesting here, though, is that in Mexico, as well as in Hawaii, this was a push through public agencies to try to get this crop developed for farmers. Was it also a public initiative in Venezuela, Guido?
Oh, yes, very, very public. It started in my alma mater, Universidad de los Andes, and it worked with the local farmers of a town that was less than an hour away from campus where I went to college. Mm-hmm. And it was funded with resources from the Ministry of Environment. Mm-hmm. And it was completely public project developed by public employees, because in Venezuela, universities, most research universities were and still are public. Mm-hmm. There were, as far as I know, there was no private involvement of any sort, because again, for Venezuelans, papayas are not a super economically important crop. It was mostly a subsistence crop that was sold locally. There's no huge papaya industry, so there was no private interest in this.
Mm-hmm. So, that leads us to the first question we got on Facebook, which is, what is the benefit or advantage of public sector GMO tech development compared to private sector tech development? And, maybe we could start with you, Joni, and then I'd like all of you to weigh in if you have something to add.
I think the benefit for public sector research for our papaya is that the legislature recognized that we needed, because if we did not solve the papaya ringspot virus, then probably 20 years ago we would have lost all the papaya farmers. And thanks to good insight, good research, we were able to solve a very real problem. Mm-hmm. And so now, result, we have demand for the fruit. People understand it more. I think by doing public research, it helps. Even though our papayas are small, they feed millions. Mm-hmm. And that's the beauty of the public sector research, is that it helped this small little farmer that people are like, oh, why would we want to just fund this? It's because this person feeds people, and it solved a very specific problem, our whole state. And that's the beauty of what this story is.
And that's an important issue in Hawaii, where so much food is imported and there's always a push to try to have more local production.
Yep.
So Guido and Luis, could you weigh in on what do you think are the advantages of having public sector tech development as opposed to private?
Well, I think that, for example, talking about the case that was presented in Mexico, well, the scientists did the research. They found, yes, it's the disease, the papaya ringspot virus, but exists different kind of the virus that causes this disease. So it was important for the scientists to develop a variety that was resistant to the main a kind of virus that were present in Mexico, because maybe a variety can grow in Hawaii, another variety can grow in Venezuela. So the farmers in Mexico needed a specific variety from Mexican farmers. So I think that this is something that it can be done by public institutions in Mexico, because I don't think that a big company will be very interested to spend millions of dollars to create a variety that may not provide so much profits. And the second point, I think, is that, for example, addressing one of the issues that were seen during the biosafety assessment when they are trying to do the environmental release of GM papaya in Mexico was the gene flow. And for example, if you are talking about a development that was produced by a public institution, there is not this issue about the economic interest for a patent about a gene. So maybe let's imagine that something happened, that the biosafety measure didn't work, that the gene flow happens, and the gene is progressed into the white population of the conventional papaya. So it might not affect the farmers' economic in the money, and with maybe for money to the farmer to use the gene. So maybe if a public institution makes a development, is open to use, is free to use, and I think that is what we need to achieve in Latin American countries.
What are your thoughts, Guido?
I would like to slightly reframe the question, because it was asked as opposed to, and it doesn't have to be as opposed to, it can be in addition to. It doesn't have to be one or the other, it can be both. And historically, you usually have the government projects start in a field, and when the private industry realizes, oh, this can be done, when there's less risk, when the field is more settled, then a bunch of companies come and make billions of dollars of it. But let's take a few steps back, and how did the IT industry and the computer industry started? With a lot of public investment and a lot of money from the US government invested in military that then trickled down to other applications. And that's now how we're being able to talk to each other, despite the fact that we're thousands of miles away. So a lot of the times it's necessary that governments invest a lot of money in problems that might not seem as exciting enough for an investor who want a return of investment of billions of dollars, but they're very important for farmers like Joni, for people like in Mexico that want to grow their own papaya in their patio, for farmers in Venezuela. They are important, and there is a lot of risk, but the investment is not that enormous, and that can open the door for private investment down the road once the private companies realize what's going on. But it's not mutually exclusive. And as Luis said, this is important because it allows access to technology by millions of people who otherwise will be locked out. And we are living in a world that has been shaped by the fact that the Green Revolution was a public development and was shared with the world. And right now, most of the varieties of plants that are feeding billions and billions of people were created that way.
That's a very good point. And I mean, one of the, as we all know, one of the complaints people have often about GM crops is this issue of corporate control. They don't want to have agrochemical companies controlling the food supply. And we are seeing in Africa and other countries, there has been, a greater emphasis on developing some of these, indigenous crops or staple crops like cowpea and things like that, that are public sector developments. But in the case of papaya, it's kind of interesting because it actually does use some technology or proprietary technology that had been owned by Monsanto, but I believe they relaxed the patent or something so that it could be used in this way. Can you shed a little light, Joni, on how there was this cooperation between the private and public sector to create something that really does benefit small farmers?
Yeah, so during the research, they were able to use the technology by Monsanto in the development, and Monsanto could have had the choice to say, well, we're going to get a cut of this seed, whatever they're selling. However, they were able to get the technology donated to the University of Hawaii so that there was not a patent on the seed, and there was no royalty paid, and it was university controlled it. So that was the way to spread to farmers.
Mm-hmm.
So that, as much as it despise the company, it's their little technology that helped us as an industry to save this essential. And it's very difficult. People, why would they do that? And we're fortunate that the technology was available. Because if it wasn't, who knows how long research would have gone.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah.
a lot of farmers don't even know that story. They just know, oh, I get the seed from the university.
Right.
But it's a little secret that people don't want to really talk about.
John, I would like to make a comment that I think it's really pertinent.
Mm-hmm.
That at this point, a lot of the discussion on patents is moot. We're talking about technology that was developed 25, 30 years ago, technology whose patents are expired. They are public domain now. So if someone in Kenya or in Colombia or in Ecuador wants to make BT corn on their own, they can access the technology that Monsanto filed a patent 20 years ago, and they can use it for free because it's public domain. The patent has expired now.
I didn't know that. Thank you for bringing that up. So that really does kind of, upend that concern that people have about this corporate supply. I mean, I think there are always those concerns, but I think that we are seeing too that there have been, there are various ways that that is being changed. So, we have another question from Facebook, which is, are there, and this is one for you, Joni, are there any disadvantages that you could notice in the papaya after the GM improvement? And did people accept the product easily?
Oh, you know what? You're cutting in and out.
Okay. I'll say it again.
I missed your...
Can you hear me well?
Okay, now I can.
Okay. So she's wondering, were there any disadvantages in the papaya after the GM improvement? And did people accept the product easily?
A lot of people will make the claim that the GM papaya was not as good as the conventional, as the original papaya. But once they really understood how to grow it best, the papaya is, people still like it. It's tasty.
Yes, please show us that delicious papaya.
This is a GMO papaya. And if you were to put it on somebody's plate, they would devour it because it's still very juicy and it's very tasty. And one of the factors was the psychological factor where, oh, this is a papaya that has genes introduced, and so this is different. The funny thing is if you put a regular, a non-GMO papaya and a GMO papaya, people will eat this one because it's just, and it's the quality. It's not so much the genes, but if you say, oh, this is GMO, then they automatically tend to go with, oh, that's not good.
Mm-hmm.
And but blind studies show that they'll eat this.
Mm-hmm.
We taste papaya every year at the legislature. People are like, is this GMO? Oh, wow, it's good.
And it's much better than some of those diseased papaya, that people do sometimes see at the farmer's market that have, the ring spots in them, and they have a very bitter taste, and they're not good at all.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about some of that, we have some other questions that are regarding political will and those types of things. So let's talk a little bit about, maybe you could start, Guido, by telling us what happened in Venezuela where, things went so wrong. So just, give us kind of a little synopsis of the tragedy of the papaya there and the research and where things are now.
You used the right word, tragedy. It was a tragedy. I was on my first year as a biology student, and I was all starry-eyed. I already knew about GMOs, and I was so excited that was something I could do that could actually help people. Because, as a scientist, one of the things that I've always wanted to do is to do research that's actually useful to help others, and I was so excited about it. And what I got was a front seat to all the horror that happened. And to me, to this day, it's still very traumatic. And I don't use that word lightly because even as a first-year student, I realized that these people were not confused. They were not misinformed. They were willfully lying. They were spreading lies on purpose to design deliberately to scare people. And I cannot emphasize this enough. This was not people who were slightly confused. No, they were liars who were on purpose trying to scare people. And there were all sorts of crazy stories. And now I have seen, now that 20 years later, I have seen similar pieces happen all over the world, from Zambia to Ghana and North South American countries. The same horror stories recycled, or very similar ones. And what happened was that these people started this campaign really hard. And I remember people actually being scared, being fearful, like, something in the air is going to come and get me. Mm-hmm. The pregnant women will told, well, if a bee touches that plant and then the bee ends up in the molasses that you will eat as a sugar, your baby will be born with problems. Can you imagine telling that to a pregnant woman? That was the sort of thing that was being passed around. So it got to a point where these people actually showed up and burned the crops. And in more normal political circumstances, the government will have stepped in and it's like, okay, let's try again, let's protect this, and let's try to educate the population. No, what happened was that the government actually sided with the protesters, and the government harassed the scientists. The government didn't believe the scientists, and also it's very important. I told you that this was fully told before. That didn't stop these people from accusing very hardworking, very honest scientists, people who I know personally, some of them are my friends, accusing them of being in the pocket of Monsanto, being paid by the transnationals. And these people are now in Venezuela having a very rough situation, trying to make ends meet, trying to eat. It's that tough in Venezuela for university professors right now. Mm-hmm. And many of the ones who were accusing them are now abroad having mm-hmm. a good life. Mm-hmm. So the government side on the side of the irrational people, and Venezuelan agricultural policies turned the wrong way, and actually research in this field was forbidden. And now you cannot even create a GMO in Venezuela. Now it's actually illegal.
Wow. So it's very.
Yes, and I also don't want to forget telling you that even after everything that happened, after seeing all the catastrophe happen, after seeing what the Venezuelan agriculture is now, you still have the anti-GMO activists trying to blame Monsanto and GMOs for the state of Venezuelan agriculture. They haven't learned anything.
Yeah, that's a little discouraging. I mean, we've seen this kind of crop destruction in Thailand, which I know is part of what motivated our own director, Sarah Avanja, to get involved in this advocacy work. What about you, Luis? Have you seen this kind of, intense, I mean, I know you have a government right now that has some anti-GMO sentiment. Have you seen this kind of intense attack against GM products and pressure on scientists? Tell us a little how that's played out.
Yes, so well, I was listening to Guido, and I know Guido have followed the highlights from Mexico, and I think that for Guido is like a deja vu, sadly. And some of the situation that is happening in Mexico with, um, with the other administration wasn't perfect, but the scientists could move forward and gradually could introduce GM crops such as citrus and cotton and soybean. But with this current government and the political will, is very sad for scientists and for farmers, because I mean, over the last 7 years, the GM maize is banned in Mexico, and recently, like 2 or 3 years, they banned GM soybean, and they are in the process to ban GM cotton. That is one of the main, that is the only GM crop that is cultivated at commercial in Mexico. And current policies also, like it's happening in Venezuela, they are cutting the funding for science. And actually, just some weeks ago, they stopped the funding biotechnology. So it's very worried about this. And it's very sad for us, for the scientific community. And I think that even when there was some efforts talking about this papaya case, right now I think it's not going to happen even with the current government. It would last till 2024, I think. We still have 4 more years for the current administration. And it's very sad to see what is happening right now, and what is happening with the farmers, and how they now have access to the new tools, and how it's very sad for us right now.
It is. And, Joni, tell us a little bit about, has there been pushback by activists against the GM papaya or other GM crops in Hawaii, and pressure against scientists there?
Yeah, there was push. So the GM papaya came first, and then was followed by the taro research. And that, because there's so much cultural significance around the taro, that research got put on a moratorium. Mm-hmm. And so now those who are farming, are experiencing problems with taro diseases like blight and whatnot. And they want something, but now we have nothing because the research has been put on hold for like 14 years. So we set ourselves back because just, with climate change and with all these things going on, what tools do we have to help the farmers? And if we don't have anything, they will fail. And then not only will they fail, everybody fails. The whole community fails. So it's very unfortunate that a lot of emotion, a lot of cultural things got involved in this whole thing, and it just stopped everything. It's just all on hold. And that sets us back how many years? Because we can't study what's going on anymore until maybe a major happens, and then it's too late. So we have the consequences of that inaction now.
So here we see Venezuela has really outlawed to do any GM research. The papaya is on hold in Mexico. There's really, I think there is some banana research happening in Hawaii, kind of low key. So is the papaya being grown anywhere else, or is Hawaii it? And is there any possibility of it being grown elsewhere? Joni, are you aware of any other place where the GM papaya is being grown?
No, not that I can't think of anywhere else where it's being grown, because it's specific to the papaya that grows here. So yeah, where else where?
If I knew, I wouldn't tell you because it's probably illegal somewhere else, and I will let the farmers alone.
I think there is some research perhaps going on in China, which has its own problems with public acceptance of it too. So basically it's like what the technology that was done in Hawaii, it's not sort of like that can be, that's not like that papaya can be taken out to every other papaya growing country. Each country has to develop its own varieties specific to its area using that approach. Is that correct? So,
I have
please.
I have a question to Joni
Yes.
because I am curious to know. I don't know if you have seen this movie documentary Food Evolution, where is a part of the movie is about the legal process that was presented in Hawaii, and we can see during the movie the recordings for the court sessions where the scientists from Cornell and this minister from Agriculture, they have the discussions, like they bring to testimonies for a number of people. So I am curious to know how the farmers lived this legal battle in the field, so how they felt about this uncertainty, if they will to have access to the tools, or they will not, or it will be banned, or it will be allowed. So I don't know if you can share with us a little bit about that time.
Oh, I couldn't hear half the question. It was cutting in and out.
I mean, I was curious because in the movie Food Evolution, we can see the legal battle that was presented in Hawaii about the case made by the court that I think that was in the process to see if they ban the crop or if they allow it or if they regulate this crop in Hawaii. So I was curious to know how was the process for the farmers, how you leave it like this uncertainty to know if the crop was allowed or it will be banned, or what can you share with us about it?
Oh, I think you were talking about the Bill 113 on the Big Island, where the council member tried to ban GMO, but then the farmers all banded together and said, no way. And then that, because the farmers banded together and they organized, basically the council member backed off and said, okay, we're going to grandfather the papaya in, because she didn't realize that there would be pushback that loud.
Okay.
And so in some way, the Big Island farmers use the same exact tactics as the activists against the activists. And that's what got them grandfathered in under that bill. Yeah, I mean, it was a very well organized, pinpointed movement that started off in small communities, spread, because our islands are all separated. And so the activists were very well organized in really manipulating the individual governments. And so by the time it came for the state government, it totally blew up. And so it was very well orchestrated. But little did they realize that not everybody's going to jump on that bandwagon. And the farmers did fight back. And farmers don't fight back. And that was unfortunate. So by the time it hit the legislature, we were overwhelmed already. I mean, it was too late. And the farmers even were like, oh no, it's social media, it's not a big deal. But boy, were we wrong. We were wrong big time. You know, and here I was, the little pipsqueak, telling everybody something big is going to happen. Something big was going to happen. And everyone was like, nah, that's just Facebook. People don't believe that stuff. Oh, no, we're wrong. They're wrong. You know, so I think for other governments or other countries who are looking for this technology, we really have to understand the psychology of how they operate and then how to go about a more rational way of thinking. Mm-hmm. I think had that and recognized that, we wouldn't have been in food evolution to begin with.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, Hawaii is a very interesting case study because there have been many attempts, and they're still ongoing, to try to control the farming industry, primarily in an attempt to stop GMO, the seed crops that are grown there and other GMO crops, but they have not yet succeeded in outlawing them or something, which leads us to another question we have, which is there political will in either Mexico or Venezuela to bring this virus-resistant papaya to market? And if not, what would it take to generate that will? And so I think this is kind of a broader question on, you know, how do you create that political will, which is so important and which was instrumental in getting it approved in Hawaii? How do you create that? And so maybe we could start with you, Luis. What about Mexico? I mean, what's happening there? You've got political will, plus you've got pressure from the big growers who don't want competition. So you've kind of got a twofold problem.
Yeah, I think that in Mexico, if we want to bring innovation to the fields, we need to change the government, because the current government is not going to allow to incorporate these new tools and these new varieties. And I just say this is not just for the government, and if the government don't give like the funding to do the research, but also this problem with the large users that might not be very, very open to an open market about the papaya industry in Mexico. And additionally, I think that there is like this issue about the public perception, because some of the things that the current government have done is to amplify the myths and the misinformation about the GMOs and about all these things that we already know over the last 20 years. So I think it's going to be very difficult. It's going to be very hard, but I think that maybe with the next government, we can be lucky enough to open again the laboratories, and to open again the fields, and to achieve the food security someday.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Guido? What are your thoughts there?
There's the opposite of political will to bring back the papaya. There's the government still, a big part of the narrative is about resistance, the empire and the corporations, and the facts don't really matter. I think that in America we're kind of getting used to that. Facts don't matter, so the narrative is what's important. So it doesn't matter that it was a public work developed by public universities. No, it's a symbol of the empire of transnationals, and we will resist it. And even if the government changes, there are so many problems that have to be addressed that this is not even a footnote in the political landscape. Part of my problem when I went through the fellowship was to realize that how bad things were then are now they're even worse. This wasn't even a blip on the radar. This was timing. This was not an ant. This was a bacteria in terms of importance. We were dealing with elephants. Mm-hmm. And even if the government changes, it will take the country becoming stable again until people have the attention span to devote to this issue. So meanwhile, what I have been trying to do is try to not to let this be forgotten, because there are lessons here, and Luis is very right. He's almost like reading my mind. When I see the news from Mexico, it's totally deja vu. They're making exactly the mistakes that we're making. And some new mistakes, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. And it's really sad, because things could have been completely different if the government of Hugo Chavez would have embraced biotechnology and invest in biotechnology, and instead of giving away polluting fossil fuels to the rest of the South American countries, they will have given away seeds, given away technology, given away training. Right now, we will have a much better agriculture all over the continent, and this would be an example of not just Hawaii, but South America taking these tools for our own and making them work for us. This could be an example of the whole world. Instead, what it was a powerhouse of misinformation and lies and ignorance. Mm-hmm. This is very frustrating to me.
Mm. It is difficult.
We must not forget this.
Yeah. And you're working on a documentary to make sure people don't forget this. Is that correct?
Yes. I'm working on a documentary. Initially it was supposed to be a 15-minute piece. Now it's going to be a 90-minute piece, because we were able to find most of the key actors. We found the security guard that was there when the papayas were burned. And we found and were able to get him to talk on the record. One of the people who burned the papayas, we had the newspaper picture of this person, and then we have the person on video saying, "Yes, I will gladly do it again."
Interesting.
They haven't learned anything, so it's up to us to learn and to realize that you cannot compromise with these people, because they are not being rational, they're not acting in goodwill, and it doesn't matter how much you want to find a middle ground, there's no middle ground. You cannot talk to these people because they are not acting on rationally and with will. Mm-hmm. There's nothing you can do. You just need to bypass them. And you want to do your thing, do it, but don't prevent others from doing their thing. You have no right to do that. Mm-hmm. We'll make sure that you don't do that. That's the only thing you can do.
So it sounds like, Venezuela is sort of a lost cause in terms of adopting any GM crops, at least anytime soon. But we do have a question from somebody who wonders, is there a possibility that Cuba's success with GM crops could help move the governments of Mexico, Venezuela, or other governments in Latin America? So I'll let both you and Luis weigh in on that. You go ahead, start first, Guido.
That's a really interesting question, and that's part of why this is so ironic. Policies of the left-leaning governments in South America. Now, after all of this, Cubans have, you can agree or disagree with them, but Cubans have usually been very pragmatic despite their ideology. And they are developing their own GM corn. And I haven't heard anything in Caracas. I haven't heard any reaction to this. You show this to people who have an anti-GMO point from the leftist perspective, and they don't answer. They just shut up. And it is true that Cubans are starting to develop that now. And actually, Cuba has a lot of biotech that's not very popular for whatever reason, and they don't seem to promote it that much. But that didn't stop the anti-GMO policies. Now that they've been more noisy, that they're doing more communication about it, we'll see if maybe that can change things. I think that we're too far gone that even adopting GMOs can make any difference if we don't adopt a lot of other things that were rejected. Mm-hmm. I'll leave it to you, Luis.
Yeah, well, in Mexico it's a very similar case because, well, the current government also have used Cuba like a role model in some topics. And for example, with the global pandemic, even the government invited to Cuban doctors to the country, and they pay them to go to the hospitals and to give advice to the Mexican doctors to deal with the COVID-19. Well, for example, when this news was spread and was shared, it's like it never happened. I mean, it's like, yes, we follow the Cuban model about medicine, but when Cuba is open to GMOs, it's not impossible. It's not. We are not going to take like this example from Cuba. So it's very like ironic, and it's very like it makes no sense. And I don't think that even if Cuba allows, I don't know, GM crops or even gene crops, Mexico will see, oh, Cuba is doing this, we are going to do this too. I don't think that is going to happen many times, sadly.
That's disappointing. So we have just a few minutes left, and we have one last question from the audience, which dovetails into a question that I wanted to ask, and that is, all three of you have dealt with anti-GMO activists, the anti-GMO movement, and so the questioner asks, what do you think is going to be different on the side of activists now that there is a clear scientific consensus with the 2020 Chemistry Nobel Prize going to gene editing tool? Will this work to sort of change attitudes toward this technology, and what can be done to sort of help move GM technology forward in the face of activism? So I'll let you start, Joni, please.
Oh, you want me to start?
Yes, please.
Okay. I think it's kind of amazing that we have a Nobel Prize winner from Hawaii, given the amount of anti-GMO, anti-TMT, anti-everything attitudes. So I think it's woken up our community, because now I see stories about how she's a public high school graduate, influenced in the public school environment. And I think it kind of wakes up everybody to say, hey, if we invest in people and we invest in science and education, we got a Nobel Prize. That's amazing. You know, a huge recognition. So I'm hoping that that will restart the conversation about having science and technology back in education. I think I'll open up the conversation more later for future. So, fingers crossed.
Yes, that was a big coup for the Big Island to have Jennifer Doudna graduate from there. Luis, what are your thoughts? Do you think this Nobel Prize is going to change things, or how can we overcome some of this resistance?
Yes, well, I think that is very exciting. I think that for scientists, watching the Nobel Prize is for normal people watching like the Oscars or the Grammys, because it's like, yes, an award of the people that I wanted. But for example, over the last year, I've been following the discussions and the regulations about gene editing. And I think that is kind of promising in Latin America, because some of the countries that already have the regulation in place, or they are in the process to discuss and to approve and to start to apply the regulation, it seems that it may be more for the region to incorporate gene editing crops to the region, instead of what happened with the GMOs, that even 20 years after the introduction of these crops, there are still some countries where it's banned or it's blocked, or they have strong activism. And I hope that the activists not make the jump from the GMO agenda to the gene editing crops, because I think that is, for scientists, is more easily to do these new varieties, is cheaper, and if it's not have the problem to be over-regulated, it will be easily to see these new varieties in the fields in all over Latin America. I think that for now there are like almost 10 countries in Latin America that are open and are considering these varieties as conventional crops. So I think that is going to be very important. And maybe if, for example, in Latin American countries, and more specific in Mexico, the GMO papaya is not something that might happen because of regulation and because all the things related with that. Maybe a gene-edited papaya could be more easily and more accessible for everyone. So I think that I'm optimistic. I hope that with these new tools, we have a new era in the food production in Mexico as well as in Latin America. So let's see what's happening.
Great. And Guido, we'll close with you. What are your thoughts on this?
I think that this is conditional. It could go either way. And why do I think this? Because in 2016, we already had a letter by 100 Nobel laureates telling people these crops are safe, these crops are necessary. We must fight climate change, we must fight hunger with them. And it didn't make that much of an effect. I mean, that changed some people's minds. But these activists are still going on and on and on. And you know what? We don't have to focus about the activists, because these people have vested interest. Either their identity revolves around this, or their monetary interest revolves around making this misinformation and scaring people. So activists, it's not that we have to deal with. We have to deal with people who are in the middle. And whoever is watching this, whoever is listening to me, I will say the biggest environmental impact that we can have is not recycling, it's not reducing our individual carbon footprint, it's making a difference at the policy level. And how we make a difference at the policy level, educating others and making sure that as a group, we make our elected representatives listen to us and change policy, because that's how real significant change is made. Of course, if we do our little bit, that helps, but that's nowhere as significant as all of us getting educated and making political pressure. We won't vote for you if you don't do this, because that's the only way we're gonna be able to survive what's coming. You know, it was scary to me. Last month when I woke up and the sky was orange, I was completely thunderstruck. It was like my brain could not process that. What is going on? It's noon, and I just woke up, and the sky is orange. And I realized that every one of us And I'm not only asking this from people who do science communication, but of everyone needs to get educated and talk to others. We need to do that part of communicating science, because Greta Thunberg said, listen to scientists, and as a society, we're not doing that. And as individuals, we need to make sure that others do that. So we all collectively make political pressure that leads to different policies that can save us as a civilization, because we're in danger right now.
It's a very good point. And I want to thank all three of you for being such great science communicators and for taking the time to join us on this program today and educate people a little bit about the papaya and some of the issues in your regions. Next week, we'll be talking about the first GMO food animal, which is the fast-growing Aqua Advantage salmon. So Joni, Luis, and Guido, thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it, and thanks our audience for the questions too. All right. Aloha, Joni.
Thank you.
Bye, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.